Yo, what's up lads, this is the Mystic Battlegrounds tier list and I just need to address a few things before I jump into this video. So this tier list and all my other tier lists are mainly aimed at people pushing high battlegrounds, so people pushing Celestial, even Mysterium. This tier list is more geared to them because you're going to find in the lower tiers certain champions do better than others. Let's take Abs for example. In Victory Track or lower tiers in the Gladiator Circuit, he's going to be one of the best Battleground champions in game. He could be an S tier because he's going to be great on defense and he's really safe on attack with all his resistances. But up in Celestial, up in Mysterium, most metas, Abs is just too slow to win you a lot of matches and he's not a good defender unlike he is in the lower tiers. But yeah, there's nothing wrong if you are not pushing Battlegrounds and you just want to watch this tier list, you're more than welcome to. There's nothing wrong with not pushing Battlegrounds. This tier list just isn't aimed at you. You're still welcome to watch though. And the next thing I want to address is just because a champion can finish certain fights fast, just because a champion can finish some match is in 50k points, that does not mean they're an automatic A tier. There's a lot more factors that goes in to deciding whether a champion places high, like are they a good defender, how many matchups are they good for, do they solve any tricky matchups. Just because a champion can get 50k points in a certain matchup, that does not mean they are an automatic A tier. Let's take for example Symbiote Supreme. There's plenty of matchups where he can finish 50k points or even 51k points, but most people would agree he's not the best Battlegrounds champion in the world because he's not the most versatile, because he relies on bleed, he relies on buffs, and he's not a good defender. So Symbiote Supreme is not going to be an automatic A tier, is he? Even though he can get a lot of fights done in 50 or even 51k points. And lastly, I'm going to go over the tiers real quick once again. In the future I'll put this in the comments so I don't drag out the video, but I'll go over it again in this video. So S tier are the best of the best Battleground champions. These are your automatic drafts. These are basically going to guarantee you a win a lot of the time. A tier are very good Battlegrounds champions, some of the best Battlegrounds champions. B tier are above average Battlegrounds champions. C tier are your average Battlegrounds champions. These are where the good champions ends. So after Diablo, you do not want to put any champions below him in your deck. D tier are bad Battlegrounds champions, but maybe they have a use in a certain meta, or maybe they're just underwhelming. E are really bad Battlegrounds champions, but maybe they have a certain use in a matchup or a certain meta. And F are just meme champions. So let's jump into the tier list. So starting off S tier, we have Chavez, and Chavez has pretty much everything you would want in a Battlegrounds champion. All of her stuff is passive, she does not rely on any buffs or debuffs, and this makes her extremely versatile. She has very high damage output, she can nuke a lot of the tougher defenders like Nick Fury, like Serpent. She's great for Onslaught. She has regen off her SB2, which helps you finish the match at 100% health. Her SB2 can go unblockable, so you can deal with annoying auto block champions. She's great for Mystic champions and any champions with power gain, because she can reverse that power from Mystic Dispersion or any power gain buffs. She is also a great defender. If they have a science champion, of course she's going to get nuked because the science class is OP, but even if you're using a champion without many buffs, it's easy to mess up the Chavez. If you push her to an L2 while she has a negative zone, she's going to be unblockable, and of course we've all been hit by an unblockable Chavez SB2, but even if it's not unblockable, it still hits very hard through your block. And we all know she likes to spam them random heavy attacks, so she gets a negative zone, and this is going to make her gain power off her SB1. So she is a very good defender, she's a very good attacker, very solid S tier. And the next champion we have Juggs. I don't normally put purely attackers in the S tier, but in any meta that Juggernaut works, you can't beat him. He's an instant win. Like, there's a lot of metas where Juggernaut doesn't work, and this would normally get you demoted down to at least A tier. But the thing is, in a meta where Juggernaut works, if you have Juggernaut, you have won the round, as long as you don't mess up. If you don't mess up, you have won the round. So that alone is gonna give him the S tier. If you don't believe me, go check out Ghost's rank 3 Juggernaut gameplay. He has loads on his channel. he is definitely an S tier champ. I don't think I need to explain too much on Juggernaut. You all know how OP he is. There's no way you're beating Juggernaut in a race, and that's just the way it is. He's the best Battlegrounds attacker in the meta he works. He's really versatile as well. He does rely on buffs, but that doesn't stop him a lot of the time because he doesn't have many expiring buffs. The unstoppables don't expire, so he can still work fine against Mystic champions. Well deserves the S tier. And next up we got Sassy, tank on defense, and he's great on offense, so of course he deserves the S tier. He has the biggest health pool in game, and this makes him great on defense. This is at the very least going to stall most champions. Most science champions finish fights in like 30 seconds, but against Sasquatch they will take at least 60 seconds most of the time. But even if they do have a science nuke to use against Sasquatch, you can just use Sasquatch in offense, and he is crit reliant. If his SB2 crits, he can do fights in 30-40 seconds, but even if his SB2 doesn't crit, he still finishes fights pretty fast, under a minute most of the time if you're using him in an appropriate matchup. So yeah, Sasquatch, one of the best dual use champs for Battlegrounds. He's not going anywhere anytime soon thanks to his massive health pool, so I think he easily deserves the S tier. Moving on to A tier, we have Kindred, and most people don't want to admit they get messed up to Kindred for some reason, but he has been one of the tougher defenders in the recent Battlegrounds metas. The most recent one was where they could crit through your block. This would make playing against Kindred extremely difficult, because if you would play against Kindred how you're supposed to, countering his SB1 to pause his charges, you would take a lot of block damage blocking the SB1 hit. So it was very hard to play against Kindred because you would either take massive block damage or you just wouldn't pause his charges. So you would take Degen at the end of the match, and he was very difficult in a lot of recent Battlegrounds metas on defense. And in general, he can be a tricky defender. If he goes stingy with the special attacks, this makes it so you can't pause his charges. So sometimes you will get unavoidably degened at the end of the match. And as a 7-star, countering his SB1 does a lot more block damage in general, so as a 7-star he is a much better defender. And Kindred does have a small health pool, he can get nuked, but a lot of the time he does enough damage to your opponent to win you the match, and I do think he deserves the A tier. He has proved in the recent metas he is a tough defender, and I think he's going to continue to stay in people's decks. I've seen plenty of rank 3 Kindreds, and to be honest, I ban a rank 3 Kindred if I can. Next champ in A tier, we have Tigra, and we all know the deal with Tigra. She's one of the fastest champs in game, she's one of the most versatile champs in game because all her damage comes from Rupture. Not many champions are immune to that, not many champions can deal with the Rupture, so Tigra is extremely versatile, but she is one of the trickier champions to play in game. There's a lot of spacing to learn with Tigra, there's a lot of practice that has to go into learning her, and she is great, she is worth learning because she does solve a lot of tricky matchups. She's a great counter for Kindred, for example. She's probably the best Serpent counter for Battlegrounds. She's a great Onslaught counter. I could be here all day. There's so many tricky matchups that Tigra solves, and she does it extremely fast. Once you learn the spacing as well, they become easy matchups. So yeah, Tigra definitely deserves the A tier. She's of course not the best defender, but she can be used on defense if you have no other option, and sometimes she will clutch you out a win on defense. But she's an attacker, and she's one of the fastest and most versatile attackers in game, so definitely deserves the A tier. Next up in A tier, we have Werewolf by Night, and he is very safe to use an attack. He's not the fastest champion unless there is a full moon. If there's a full moon, he is about 10 seconds faster, and that does make him compete with a lot of the top Battlegrounds attackers. But either way, I would put him in A tier because most fights he can do in under 60 seconds, and he's very safe for these matchups with his playstyle. He can just hit into block and play it slow, work his way up to an SB2 by howling and gaining that power gain, use the SB2 to kill him. So yeah, he is just a very safe attacker that can finish a lot of fights in under a minute. His damage source is Rupture, so like Tigra, he's very versatile, and unlike Tigra, Werewolf by Night is a very solid defender, even can give science champions a tough time because not many science champions can deal with Werewolf's Rupture. So if you block a lot of Wolf's attacks, you're going to get a lot of ruptures on yourself, and you're going to take a lot of damage, and at that point it doesn't matter if you're using a science nuke or not, you'll be taking a lot of damage. So you don't really want to block against this guy you definitely want to rely on the intercepts, or you want to attack him while he's howling. And Werewolf's AI is very weird. Sometimes he'll just dash back and howl. Sometimes he'll throw a light attack out of nowhere. So he does catch a lot of people on defense. He's a very solid defender. Next champion in A tier is Kushala. Now Kushala is not the best defender, but she does have some uses on defense. If you place her against champions that rely on buffs, she is going to destroy them because she gains a lot of power whenever her opponent gains buffs. So she can be good on defense in those scenarios, but otherwise she's really not a good defender. But she is a great attacker. She's very fast and very versatile. She can finish a lot of matchups in 30 to 50 seconds, and she's very versatile because she relies on incinerate. Not many champions are immune to that, but even if they are immune to incinerate, you can deal damage through your soul barb. And she's a great counter to a lot of tricky matchups like Serpent, like Bullseye, like Maestro, and she's very fast in these matchups as well. She just handles so many tricky defenders, and she's pretty fast as well. So I think she does deserve the A tier, and I think most people would agree with that. Most people run Kushala in their deck. Next champ and the last champ in A tier is Hood. Now Hood may not be as fast as a normal champion in A tier would be. He can nuke cosmic champions, and he can do some fights in 30-40 seconds, but in general you're getting around a 50-second fight off Hood. But Hood has so much utility that is good for Battlegrounds. He has to be in A tier. He is probably the most versatile champ in game because no champ is immune to Hood's bullets. Now Hood's bullets are energy damage, so you don't want to use him against champions that have big energy resistance like Bishop or Havoc, for example. But in general, no champions are immune to Hood's bullets. You just want to watch out for champions that have high energy resistance. He has that invisibility, which is so clutch for landing free openings, and it lets you tank special attacks through the invisibility. It's just so nice for finishing at 100% health. He has that power steal, which lets you play the match in a way where you don't have to bait any special attacks if you want to. He has some of the strongest buff control in the entire game. He has a permanent fate steal of the SB2, where you can keep up the entire match by refreshing with a medium attack. He also has a stagger, what he can apply off his critical hits. And his fate steal of the SB2 has some of the strongest ability accuracy reduction in game. Has a 65% ability accuracy reduction, and this can stop so many things. Like it can stop Kindred's root, for example. It can stop Serpent's death immunity. He's just extremely versatile. He works for a lot of tricky defenders. It's very easy to finish fights 100% health with Hood because of his invisibility, so you don't really have to block and you get free openings. You don't have to bait any special attacks if you don't want to with Hood. He's just a very good Battlegrounds attacker. He may not be the fastest in game, but he can nuke his fair share of matchups. He can nuke cosmic champions and champions like Kindred in 30-40 seconds. But in general, you're looking at around a 50-second fight, but you're going to finish that 50-second fight 100% health and very safely. So yeah, he definitely deserves the A tier in my opinion. He is one of the best Battlegrounds attackers in the game. I pretty much automatically draft mine whenever I see him. He's just so good for so many defenders you won't think of, like Killmonger, like Korg. I could sit here all day going on about Hood, but I have a showcase on him, so if you want to see more on Hood, go check that out, and we'll move on to B tier now. So the first champion in B tier is Abs, and the reason he is not higher is because he is really not a good defender up in high tier Battlegrounds. He will get nuked in 30-40 seconds by most good Battlegrounds attackers, and most champions in people's Battlegrounds decks, even defenders, can take Absman really well. There's so many champions on this list alone that can nuke Absman. Chavez, Juggs, Sassy, Tigra, Kushala, Hood, Wolf, they can all nuke Absman, and there's so many more champions that can nuke Absman in 30-40 seconds, and people up in high tier Battlegrounds really don't have a problem with him. He's really not a good defender, and in the general meta, Abs is far from the fastest attacker. Most matchups with Abs outside of his ideal matchups are going to take around 60 seconds, but he is extremely versatile thanks to his Black Uru form. This will give him massive physical resistance, so this makes him very safe to play, and this makes him a great counter to Atuma because Atuma's Thorns damage is physical damage. And with his magma form. This gives him massive energy resistance, so this lets him take champions like Electro, and it will make all his attacks energy damage, so this lets him counter champions like Korg with ease. He is very versatile. There are not many champions Absman can't take. He's just not the fastest attacker, and he's definitely not the best on defense up in the higher tiers of Battlegrounds. There are certain metas where Abs shines on attack. Any metas what apply effects what Abs is immune to is going to make him much easier to play. He's one of the best attackers for these metas. I don't want to sound like I'm shitting on Abs too much because he is a great Battlegrounds champion. Just he has a lot of problems in the higher tiers of Battlegrounds, like not being a good defender. He will lose you matchups a lot on time, but he is extremely versatile. He is extremely safe. He has a lot of utility, and there are a lot of metas where you want to include Abs in your deck. He does make it to a lot of people's decks every single meta, so I do think Absman definitely deserves the B spot. Let me know your opinion on Abs, and we'll move on to the next champion now. Next champion in B tier is Longshot, and Longshot is one of those sneaky Battlegrounds champs. He just has so many tricks up his sleeve. For example, he's a great counter to Domino because he has 300% ability accuracy. So you just need to know not to parry Domino, and you won't take much crit fail damage at all. He's a great counter to Maestro. I have a vid on that coming very soon. That's going to be a celestial secret. He is great for any champions that rely on buffs and can be fate stilled or nullified. He is one of the fastest nuke champions for champions that rely on buffs, but even against champions that don't rely on buffs, he can still be pretty fast. Most fights are over in an SB2 into an SB1 rotation. He can finish most fights that can be incinerated and bled in around 50 seconds, even if they don't rely on any buffs. And if they do rely on buffs, the matchup is just going to get nuked faster for each buff you nullify. And he is one of the better Mystic defenders. His 300% ability accuracy stops champions like AA and Tigra from completely countering him. They can still do the fight, but if he has any nodes on him, AA and Tigra will not stop the buffs or will not counter the nodes from Longshot because of his 300% ability accuracy. And if you're not using a buff immune champion, it's very easy to mess up to Longshot. If he throws that SB2 with Pure of Heart, you're dead. There's no way around it. You're dead. And he can constantly throw SB1s because if the opponent is running max 5 out of 5 MD, your deck's in the L1, triggering MD, and Longshot gains a lot of power gain from his bad karma. So there's a lot of times where you're just baiting the SB1 for a good portion of the match. It's very easy to push Longshot to an SB2 and get hit by those incinerates. So yeah, Longshot's just a very good defender. He's a very solid attacker. He's a complete nuke against champions that rely on buffs, but even against champions that don't rely on buffs, he can finish fights in around 50-60 seconds. So still pretty fast, and he's a very good defender. So yeah, he definitely deserves the B tier without a doubt. I would definitely put him at the top of B tier, to be honest. Maybe a promotion to A tier in the future. Depends on how the metas go. If the metas give the opponent buffs to nullify, Longshot's always going to be one of the best options. But let's move on to the next champ now. So Moore can be a solid attacker, but he's definitely not the fastest attacker around. But he can nuke certain matchups. Cosmic matchups he can do in around 40 to 50 seconds if you line up the SB2 perfect. He can counter Maestro. This takes around 60-70 seconds, but you need to line the SB2s perfect. He's not the easiest champion to play on offense because his falter is a very tight window, and you need to land the SB2 as soon as the falter appears to get the max amount of degens of the SB2 and get the max amount of damage. But he can do cosmic matchups fast. He can do an average matchup in around 60 seconds if you play perfect. So he can be a great attacker. He's just not the easiest attacker to use. His medium attacks are non-contact, so this does let him counter champions like Atuma and Electro. This lets him ignore the damage back off them, so he can be a sneaky counter to those defenders. He is a decent attack option, and he is a great defender. His medium attacks are non-contact, and you do want to land heavy attacks against this guy, so you end up taking a lot of block damage against him, trying to reparry him, so you can knock him down with a heavy attack and pause the falter timer. But a lot of the time he just doesn't want to throw a light attack, he just throws medium attacks into your block, and you can't parry his medium attacks, so you do end up taking a lot of block damage trying to fight more sometimes. He can be a very tricky defender with the falter if you're not paying attention to that. If you're not constantly knocking him down, he's going to apply a falter to you, and if you hit into that falter, he's going to do massive degen damage. Mordo does catch a lot of people on defense, even if they're using a science champion. I have even seen people mess up with Titania, with Hulk, some of the best science options. They have still messed up to more because they don't specifically counter the falter, they don't specifically counter Moore's non-contact medium attacks, so they still struggle and he still take a lot of damage against Moore. So he is a very solid defender, he's a solid attacker, definitely deserves the B tier. And it's worth mentioning he did cheese the victory track node because the opponent had guaranteed critical hits, and if the opponent has guaranteed critical hits, they cannot hit Moore. Moore has a 100% chance to miss against guaranteed critical hits, so he easily cheesed the victory track meta. But in general, he's a very solid dual use champion, and I have no regrets on my rank 2 Moore. He makes it to my deck most battlegrounds metas, and he does put in a lot of work for me. Next champion we got Mojo. I was thinking about moving Mojo down to C tier, but the reason I've kept him in B tier is because he is a very solid serpent counter. He can kill serpent in around 70 seconds, and he can do a pretty high health, which is better than most champions in the game. He counters his death immunity with Mojo's aura. He's going to reduce serpent's death immunity duration by 90%, so it only lasts less than a second. And Mojo also makes serpent's power gain expire quickly. He's just a great counter to serpent. I need to get a video out on that, but in general, he can be very good against Mystic champions with a lot of buffs. He will finish those fights extremely fast. But if you're not against the Mystic champion with buffs, you will have to ramp up 5 charges, get your Fury. And when you get your Fury, you do start doing some massive damage, and you will be able to finish off most champions in around 60-70 seconds. Mojo's definitely not the best defender anymore. Most of the science champions can nuke him. AA nukes him, but if you catch them without a good science champion, you catch them without AA, catch them without a good counter, Mojo can still cook very hard on defense. It's very hard to finish high health against Mojo if you don't have a good counter to him. And he does handle a lot of the trickier defenders. He's very good for Storm X, for example. He's very good for Maestro. He's very good for Serpent, which is the most important one, and the matchup keeping him B tier for now. But let me know what you think about Mojo. I think he definitely deserves the B tier. And last champion in this tier might surprise you, it is Mordo, but Mordo is very good on attack. He has a very high damage output. He is relying on buffs though. You want to charge Mordo's heavy attack to get 15 fury buffs, and when he's at 15 fury buffs, his damage is outrageous. You can spam SB1s to get degens, or you can go for the soul bob off the SB2. And if you're against a champion with buffs, the soul bob off the SB2 does crazy damage. You can do Hulklings and Gallons in under 30 seconds with Mordo. You can do Maestros very fast with Mordo. His damage output in general is very good. You can't really take Mystic champions with him because he is very reliant on buffs. But in the matchups Mordo works for, he can be extremely fast. He can finish a lot of fights in around 40-45 seconds. He's a great counter for Domino, for example, because his ability accuracy cannot be reduced. So as long as you don't parry, you're not going to be taking many, if any, crit fail damage at all. Just in general, he is a great nuke champion, and he can be a pretty good defender. We all know how Mordo's AI is. Once he gains that power gain buff, he's going to dash back into the corner and hold block. And if you're running 5 out of 5 stand your ground, this will mess you up if you try to heavy attack him whilst he's holding block, because you'll get resisted and probably eat a combo. And it's easy to push Mordo to an SB3 because he has a lot of power gain So yeah, Mordo, very underrated dual use champion for Battlegrounds. I would love me a 7-star. I would rank to him straight away. Alright, now we're moving into C tier, and C tier is the last of the good champs for Battlegrounds. Below Diablo, I do not recommend you put any of these champs in your deck unless it's a certain meta, etc. So, starting off C tier, we have Symbiote Supreme, and honestly, I was debating moving this guy up to B. There's a very good chance Symbiote Supreme is going to go up in the future. He is very good on attack, and he solves a lot of tricky defenders actually. He can nuke Killmongers, Maestros, Serpents in a minute. He's good for a few tricky defenders, but there are a few problems with Symbiote Supreme. He's not a good defender, and he's not the most versatile champ because he relies on bleeds and he relies on buffs. And he's not the fastest champ in a matchup where there are no buffs to take advantage of. So that's what's holding Symbiote Supreme in a C tier. But if there are more metas where Symbiote Supreme shines, he will go up for sure. Seen a lot of players do some great things with Symbiote Supreme. He's a serpent counter, which is very important. So we'll put Symbiote Supreme at the top of C tier. Definitely a chance he could move up in the future. Moving on to the next champ is the Destroyer, and Destroyer's not been out long. He seems like he has some defensive potential. His main defensive threat is that he will go unstoppable whenever he dashes at you. This does not go on cooldown. He will always go unstoppable when he dashes at you, so you can't intercept this guy. You have to parry him or bait out heavy attacks. So he does have some defensive use. There are a lot of champions that can nuke him. The entire science class can nuke him pretty much, but he can stall on defense. He can do some block damage on defense. He is a decent defender, and on attack in certain matchups against cosmic matchups with a lot of buffs, he does very well. But in a general matchup, he's not that fast against champions that don't rely on buffs, and he is a decent defender, just not a great defender. So I think C tier is the right spot for him for now. Good chance he might go down in the future. Good chance he might go up, because when more people get their hands on him, they might prove he's good for certain matchups, or he's better on defense than we thought. There might be metas where he is better on defense. So for now, I'm putting him in the middle of the road, which is C. Next champ is Dr. Doom, and Doom used to be one of the best Battlegrounds champions dual use, but nowadays he has fell off a bit. He's too slow on offense to win you most matchups. He is very safe because he's very tanky, and of course he has his Doom cycle, and there's no risk once you lock your opponent in the Doom cycle. But Doom is far from the fastest champion. A good match for him takes around 60 seconds. On average, you're looking at around a 70-second match, 90 seconds if you need to go for 2 SV3s. But he is very safe on attack. He's just not the fastest champion. And on defense, we all know he used to be one of the best defenders in game. But nowadays, there are so many champions with guaranteed critical hits. There are so many champions that deal damage over time effects, and these completely bypass Doom's armor. These completely bypass how tanky Doom is. So he ends up getting nuked a lot on defense. And Doom was a staple back when Battlegrounds was in the beta. So many people had Doom in their deck. So many people are just so used to fighting Doom, and they never make a mistake against him because they've been fighting him in Battlegrounds for over a year. So yeah, Doom just fell off in Battlegrounds. He's not the best defender anymore. He can still be good on defense if you catch them without a good counter, of course, but most of the time he's going to get nuked on defense, and he's too slow on attack to win you most matchups. But he can be solid in certain metas, especially if you need buff control, or especially if it's not a nuke meta and you just want to safely control your opponents. Doom can definitely be worth putting in a deck there. So we'll keep him in C tier. He will not move anywhere below C tier, that's for sure. He will always be at least this, because he is at the very least very safe, very tanky, and has some defensive use. So let's move on to Spidey Supreme now. Now we all know the big problem with Spidey Supreme. If it wasn't for this problem, he would actually probably be much higher on the tier list. Definitely B, possible A, but he has one of the lowest health pools in game. He would be a good defender, but he just gets nuked so fast because his health pool is so low, so he ends up not being a good defender. He has pretty much no defensive use. Do not place Spider Supreme on defense. You will lose on time. 100% of the time in high tier battlegrounds. In lower tier battlegrounds, yeah, people can mess up to him, but he gets nuked so fast that it's hard to make a mistake against Spidey Supreme. He's really not the best defender. He does have some very cool uses on attack though, like for example, this current meta is the X Magicka meta, and we have Fate Steel as well. And whenever the Fate Steel gets rid of the buff Spidey Supreme places on his opponent, he's going to deal massive damage, so he's one of the best attackers for the current Gladiator Circuit node. He can counter Domino because his ability accuracy cannot be modified. He's great for Cosmic Champions, good counter to Maestro. I haven't seen him counter Serpent. I'm not sure if he can do that, but I would love to see that. But he's a great counter to Cosmic Champions, nukes them very fast. In general, he's still pretty fast. He's not the fastest champion, but he can finish fights in around 40-50 seconds, even if there's no buffs to take advantage of. He's pretty safe because he has that phase whenever you dash in to intercept. So I do think Spidey Supreme is a decent champ. If they just gave him a health buff, that's all Kabam need to do, just give him more health. He would skyrocket up the tier list. He would be so much more popular. I can't explain to you how much better on defense he would be if he had more health, and that would make him a much better overall Battlegrounds champion. So moving on to the next champion, we have Wong. Wong could be a good defender. The best metas for Wong on defense are metas where you can't reliably parry this guy, because that makes it so if you bait heavy attacks, he's going to go unstoppable and trigger his power gain. He's really annoying in metas where you can't parry him. In an average meta, Wong isn't the best defender though, because there's so many science champs or just random champions like Starkey, Massacre. There are so many champions that can nuke Wong. He's not the best defender in the average meta, but in metas where you can't parry him, he is a pretty great defender, and he can be pretty good on attack. He's far from the fastest champion, but he has that regen, so it's very easy to finish at 100% health with Wong. Once you get ramped up, he does do some good damage. He can take Maestros. He is good for a few matchups. He's just not the fastest champ. He's very versatile because all his spells are passive. He's just far from the fastest. So yeah, I think that explains Wong. Solid C tier. Next champion, we have Dragon Man, and he is a solid defender. Of course, there are many science champions and many other champions that can nuke him, but he has long special attacks. He's pretty tanky. He can stall out the opponent very well. So he is a solid defender. He has done pretty well for me on defense in the past. And on offense, he's not the fastest champion, but he can nuke cosmic matchups against champions with a lot of buffs. His damage is really good, because once you get your opponent in the corner, you're going to deal extra burst damage for each buff on the opponent, and against champions like Hulkling, Gore, this really pops off. So his damage is really good against champions with a lot of buffs. In an average matchup, you're looking at around a 60-70 second fight though, so not the fastest in an average matchup. He can be a pretty good defender. He has long special attacks, and he's pretty tanky, so he is a pretty decent stall on defense. There are a lot of science champions that can nuke him pretty well though. So that's Dragon Man. He is a solid C tier. He is worth putting in your Battlegrounds deck. He's good for a few tricky matchups. Like, he counters Red Skull, for example, very well, because when Red Skull throws his SB1, you can counter it with a heavy attack, and then you'll have an unblockable buff. So this lets you ignore Red Skull's auto block. You have a slow, so you can ignore Red Skull's unstoppable off the SB2. You can decrease Red Skull's combat power rate if you lock him in the corner when he's above 2 bars of power. Dragon Man is very nice for staying very aggressive, because if you back your opponent in the corner when they're at or above 2 bars of power, you're going to decrease their combat power rate significantly. So this lets you be very aggressive. So Dragon Man, solid dual use champion for Battlegrounds, but just not the best defender, not the best attacker. He's just solid. Okay, next champion is Scarlet Witch, and she's not a good defender at all. She's too squishy to be good on defense. She gets nuked every single time I have tried and placed her, but she has some very cool uses on offense. I've used her to counter a serpent before, and the fight went really well. I got that serpent down in around 70 seconds, 90% health. Haven't used her again because she hasn't been in my deck since that, but she does counter serpent pretty well. She can counter champions like Storm X or any champions that have prowess buff, because she can steal those prowess buffs. Any meta where there's prowess to steal, Scarlet Witch will be one of the best attackers. She can do some ridiculous 30-second fights. In general, she can steal buffs as well, so if your opponent has a lot of fury buffs, you can steal them. She is very good on attack for a few matchups like Korg, like Maestro. So you might be wondering, if she's so good on attack, why is she only in C tier? Big problem with Scarlet Witch. Her block proficiency is terrible, and you have to parry to play Scarlet Witch well so you can steal the buffs off your opponent. So this just makes you take a lot of chip damage, and it's unavoidable because if you don't play her in a way where you're parrying a lot, you're just going to take a very long time in a match. I'm hoping this changes when she's a 7-star and the block proficiency stat focus really helps her out. If it does, she will honestly go up a tier. She is a great attacker. The only thing holding her back is that she's so squishy and her block proficiency is terrible and she takes so much block damage. So that is Scarlet Witch. She is a great attacker. She's a nuke against Cosmic Champions. Even in a general matchup like Korg, she can finish in 60 seconds, 50 seconds with good RNG. Very solid attacker. Just needs a block proficiency buff. Now, we all know the deal with Rintrah. He used to be one of the best defenders in game just because of how much health he had, how tanky he was. He would make most champions time out, but that's just not the case anymore. Science class is so OP, and there are so many more nuke champions around. No one really has issues with Rintrah. He's very easy to fight as well, so most times your opponent is going to come out 100% health. If you place him on defense, an average fight against Rintrah will only take around 50-60 seconds nowadays. But he can still stall on defense. He will still make most science champions take 50-60 seconds when normally they would take 30 or 40. So he can be a good stall on defense. He's just very easy to fight. He's not going to take any health off your opponent, but he can stall. And on offense, he's so unreliable. If he crits, he is one of the faster champs in game. But it's so rare that Rintrah crits. There's like a 5% chance or something stupid you'll crit on the SB2. Rarely happens, so you can't rely on that. And when Rintrah's SB2 doesn't crit, you're not finishing matchups that fast at all. It will take around 60-70 seconds if you're lucky, if you don't crit. So that's Rintrah. He can counter some tricky defenders, like he can take Serpent for example, but he doesn't have enough damage unless he crits on the SB2 to actually get Serpent down. So he's not the best Serpent counter by any means. He can handle Cosmic Champions very well because he has that very strong Neutralize, which is 200% potency. That Neutralize is very nice. He's just not the fastest attacker and he's not the best defender anymore, but he's still solid. Can stall on defense at the very least, and that's more than most champions can say, so we'll leave him in C tier. Next champion is Mephisto, and Mephisto used to be one of the better defenders in Battlegrounds, but the science class is too strong nowadays. Even if they're not incinerate immune, most science champions have access to a lot of debuffs, which gives them access to a Netquity, which reduces Mephisto's aura damage by a lot. But Mephisto can still beat a pretty annoying defender, because at the very least, if you're not incinerate immune, he's going to do at least a bit of chip damage to you. And he gains a lot of power. It's just he has a small health pool, so he ends up getting nuked a lot. And he's not a good attacker at all, so if your opponent drafts a good counter for him, like Torch or Sunspot, it's over. There's nothing you can do. You can't switch it around and use him on offense. So I think C tier is the right spot for Mephisto. And next one, we got Mangog. And honestly, Mangog might have to go down to D. He can do some stuff on offense if he's a rank 3 7-star, but if he's a rank 2 7-star, his rotation will not kill most of the time. He is too slow in most matchups to be good on offense. But on defense, he gets nuked by most of the science champs, well, all the science champs. And there's so many other champions that can nuke him. Mantis, Starkey, even Tigra, even Hood, even Juggs, Chavez. There are so many champions that can nuke Mangog. When he first came out, he was a very scary defender. But people have learned how to deal with him. People have learned how to nuke him. He doesn't pose much of a threat on defense nowadays. Science class is too OP. So, honestly, there's a good chance Mangog could move down to D. He is scary on defense in certain metas, especially metas where they have a lot of block damage, because if he gets to that SB2, he's going to kill you through the block. But other than that, he's a pretty mid defender and a pretty mid attacker, so we'll put him at the bottom of C tier for sure. Okay, and last champion is Diablo. Now, he has no use on defense, of course, but Diablo can be a solid attacker. He's far from the fastest champion because in most matchups you do want to go for an SB3, but he can finish fights like Korg and Sasquatch relatively fast. It's around a 60-70 second match, and that's faster than most champions can deal with those fights. But in an average matchup, he's not the fastest, but it's very safe because he has that nice regen, so it's very easy to finish 100% health against him. He has that nice nullify, so I do think Diablo deserves the C spot. He's also pretty versatile. Of course, as long as the opponent can be poisoned, he can get him down. And there are plenty of metas where you would want Diablo in your deck. A meta where there's buffs to take advantage of. He does become a lot faster because he can get to his SB3 faster. So he is much better in matchups that rely on buffs. He does become a faster champion. But in general, you're looking at around a 60-second fight with Diablo. But he's very versatile. He has that nice regen to help him finish 100% health, and he has that nice regen. He has some nice utility, so definitely deserves the C spot. Moving on to D tier, and after Diablo, you don't want to put any of these champions in your deck. These are champions that are not great for Battlegrounds in most metas. So let's start off the D tier. We're going to run through these like we have in all the other tier list videos. We're not going to take as much time on these just because these aren't champions you want to pay your attention to anyway. So for Jane Foster, trash on defense, has guaranteed critical hits when the opponent is stunned, so she can put out some decent damage. She can be pretty versatile by just parrying heavying, but she's far from the fastest champion game, and she has no use on defense, and she's not good for any tricky matchups, so D spot. Wiccan, too squishy to be a good defender, even though he does catch some people on defense, but in general, he's too squishy to be a good defender, and on attack, he's just way too slow. Sorcerer Supreme, trash defender, on attack, just way too slow, doesn't have enough damage. Scarlet Witch OG needs max sig, and there are certain metas like crit me with your best shot where she can be a great attacker, but in general, she's RNG reliant. Most of the time, she's too slow to win your matchups, and she's not really a good defender. She could be in certain scenarios, but in general, she's unreliable on attack, and she's not a good defender, so D tier. Next champion is Manfing, and he's too slow to be good on attack, and it's very easy to get pushed to an SB3 with Manfing as well. That's another problem with him on attack. He's definitely not the best attacker. He can be okay on defense, but science champions are so common in people's Battlegrounds decks. He just gets nuked so often. He's not really a good defender anymore, unless there's a crit me with your best shot meta, because of course Manfing takes 75% less damage from critical hits, so he's very tanky against champions that rely on crits, but otherwise he's very easy to take down. He doesn't put in any work on defense, and he's not a good attacker at all, so D tier for Manfing. Black Widow Clairvoyant, now she may move up for the sole reason that she's a serpent counter. That's the only reason she will move up. There is no other reason. In general, she's too slow for Battlegrounds, not a good defender, but she is a good serpent counter, and Serpent is the big bad defender right now. He is the scariest defender, so people are looking for that. So there is a reason to put Claire in your deck right now. It's the counter Serpent, but you won't want to use her in any other matchups apart from cosmic matchups like Hulkling, but even in those, she's still not the fastest. So D tier for Claire, just because she's good for one match doesn't mean I can move her up, I don't think. Let me know what you guys think on Claire though. I'm interested to see people's opinions on her. Unstoppable Colossus, he goes unstoppable, so I guess he can be a stall on defense, I guess. Purgatory, not a good defender, too slow on offense. Morning Star, can be good if the opponent has a lot of buffs, but otherwise too slow on offense. Not a good defender because her bleeds do not do enough damage. They end up actually healing you with willpower. Guillotine, she does some decent damage, but her playstyle isn't great for BGs. You want to spam a lot of heavy attacks in the corner, and you need to be very, very aggressive. So if you're fighting any sort of tricky defender, it's not easy to stay to a usual rotation, and then her damage becomes mid if you can't keep up her rotation of spamming heavy attacks in the corner into an SB1. Of course, she's not a good defender at all. She can be useful to have in the deck for regen reversal. So if there's a meta where they have massive regen, definitely put Guillotine in your deck. But other than that, Not too great on attack, not a good defender, so E tier. Deathless Guillotine has pretty much the same case, not a good defender, has some decent damage, has a heal reverse, but in general you don't want to put her in your deck. Magic, the only reason she's in E is because she's a 5-star, and 5 stars are not going to cut it. She can still be a tricky defender with that limbo. Even as a 5-star, she can do some unavoidable damage to you, but she will get nuked extremely fast as a 5-star. She needs to come out as a 6-star, and my prediction for Magic, if she was a 6-star, she would probably be in B tier maybe, because I think she'd be a really solid defender. With that limbo, she does a lot of unavoidable damage. She'd probably be too slow on attack though to win you most matchups, but we'd have to see. We'll have to see if Kabam ever release a 7-star Magic. Dormammu, basically a worse version of Mojo that is bad on offense. Dr. Voodoo, worse version of Longshot basically, and he has no use on defense, and his damage isn't the best, so he's definitely not the best attacker, not a good defender. So E tier. F tier are just your meme champions, your Iron Fist, your Lokis. I guess Loki could be good in a meta where the opponent has a lot of buffs because you can steal those buffs, but now in general Loki is trash. We haven't seen a meta where Loki is good, so definitely an F tier. But that's going to be the end of this tier list, lads. If you somehow watched all of this, you are a madman. Thank you. I'd appreciate it if you could leave a like. And yeah, next tier list is probably going to come out on Monday, and it's probably going to be the cosmic tier list, and then I'll try to get the science tier list out for Tuesday. These videos just take a while to make because there's a lot to go over, and I do need to do my research on certain champs just to make sure what I'm saying is correct and I'm as accurate as possible. But at the end of the day, this is all my opinion from playing up in Celestial. This is not going to be everyone's opinion. A lot of people are going to disagree with this, a lot of people are going to agree with this, and that's fine. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next video.